Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar. This is on managing your furniture projects, and this is being hosted by the GSA Integrated Workplace Acquisition Center. Just a couple housekeeping notes before we get started. This session is being recorded, and every attendee will be muted throughout the entire webinar. We encourage you to type your questions in the Q&A pod. Keep in mind that perhaps your question might be answered during the session, so consider that if you have a question early in the session, and maybe wait a few minutes to type it if you're not sure if the speaker will cover it. Anyway, the slides, the recording, and a Q&A sheet will be emailed to everyone that has registered within about 10 days. And every attendee will earn 1 CLP for this session today. If you're attending with perhaps a coworker and you didn't yourself log in, we won't know that you've attended, and we won't know to send you a CLP certificate. To remedy that, you can simply send an email to furniture@gsa.gov to let us know that you attended. And the CLP certificates will be sent out within about 10 days. So let's get started. I didn't even introduce myself. My name is Christine Stein, and I'm a business development analyst with the Integrated Workplace Acquisition Center. And today's trainer is Melissa DiTomaso, a contracting officer and projects team lead here with the center. Go ahead. Let me just go through the agenda for everybody. I'll talk a little bit about us, the Integrated Workplace Acquisition Center, and what we do. I'm going to turn it over to Melissa, and she's going to take you through managing a furniture project, which is going to entail looking at the market, requirements, the timeline, and the schedule. Melissa will talk about small business considerations, the request for quote. She'll teach you a little bit about quote evaluations, and wrap up with the post-award. So let's get started. So I said that our organization was the GSA Integrated Workplace Acquisition Center. That is part of the GSA Federal Acquisition Service. And we manage 6 multiple award schedules, but related to furniture, we manage the 3 that you see listed on the screen right now. That's Schedule 71 for furniture products only, and then Schedule 71-2K for furniture-related services. That's where you would find services like interior design services or furniture relocation services, services like that. We also manage Schedule 72, which covers flooring, wall art, drapes, blinds, and other miscellaneous furnishings like that. We also manage an assisted acquisition services team. This is going to be where you would turn over a project, and we would manage the complete process, starting from the development of the requirement to accounts payable. There is a fee that applies to that service. But we also have no-cost advising services. We have a couple client advisors here on our staff that are happy to sit down with you and help you with your furniture project. And that might be any kind of furniture project. Perhaps you're putting together a BPA for your agency or something smaller. We have folks here that can help you with that. The other thing we do here on this team is we manage a section of the acquisition gateway. In particular, it's the furniture hallway, which is part of the office management hallway. And we'll just point out a couple of the resources that you can find there. I'll jump to the next slide. Go ahead. If you take the time to go to the acquisition gateway, you'll see a lot of different resources that will help you manage a furniture project. And we have them listed on the screen right now. eBuyOpen is a really useful tool, and many of you have perhaps tried taking a look at it. Right there, you'll see historical and current RFIs and RFQs for not only your organization, but across government. If you go into the furniture hallway, you're going to find expert articles. You're going to get CPA access and furniture specs and standards. And a lot of those expert articles are kept up to date, of course, and they have been written by many of our furniture experts here at the GSA Integrated Workplace Acquisition Center. You'll also have the opportunity to look at the document library for sample furniture statements of work and RFQs, which can be extremely useful if you're new to buying furniture. You can use something called the Solutions Finder, which is really a filtering tool that lets you enter your agency and other information about your organization to filter what kinds or what exact contract vehicles are available for your requirement. And then lastly, there's a community space on the Acquisition Gateway, where you can basically ask questions to get answers from the experts on the spot. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Melissa DiTomaso, our speaker for today. Melissa?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Melissa DiTomaso. As Chris mentioned earlier, I am a supervisory contracting officer / team lead here for the projects team here in the Integrated Workplace Acquisition Center. I've been with GSA. I actually just reached my milestone of 10 years this week. I didn't even realize it, but I've been with the government for 13 years total, and I want to say for my 10 years here at GSA, for the better part of 7 years, I've probably been buying furniture. We face many challenges when it comes to buying furniture. I find it very challenging. You would think it would be something that's relatively easy, but it's not. And hopefully some of you, feel my frustration with that or feelings, and that's why you called into this webinar to sort of get some tips or some information on, how to buy furniture. I will say in the time that I have been working on projects and as the team lead for the projects group, one of the things that we try to do is constantly develop ways to streamline this process to try to make it easier. We try to work with industry a lot so that way we can develop ways to kind of make this process a little bit easier and a little bit better, so that way we can make administration of it a little bit easier. So the first thing I think that to know or to figure out when you're dealing with a furniture procurement is to understand your audience, so get to know the market. So some of the things that we have come to summarize about dealing with the market is the first would be contract furniture vendors differentiate their products. So basically what that means is products are not compatible among manufacturers. So you cannot use, in a systems furniture environment, if you're creating a workstation, you can't use panels from 2 different manufacturers to create your workstation solution. That's just not something that's feasible, and it just won't work out. As for office furniture, it is in fact commercial, but it is not off the shelf. So, these are commercial standard items. They're available on the commercial marketplace, but it's not like catalog shopping if you're shopping for yourself. You can't just look through a book and pick out something. It's very much specific and tailored to your agency and your requirements and the function that your employees are responsible for. And then one of the other things is also furniture product is not stored somewhere in a warehouse. It's sort of manufactured just in time. So that's another aspect of it. It's commercial but not off the shelf. As far as requirements, furniture requirements development, a lot of times this really requires interior design services. So, basically a designer will come in and they will assess your space and they will assess your workforce and the functions that your agency is responsible for, and they will design a solution that is tailored to your requirements and your space. And that really is a service that an interior designer can provide for you. I just want to point out that, in the commercial world, the process is different. The vendors do a lot of no-cost design work in the interest of, getting the business, and they create a package that is sort of manufacturer specific. So in the world of government, that won't work because we need a level of competition, in accordance with the FAR regulations. Sorry. So some of the key characteristics of the industry is there are less than 10 large manufacturers that produce most contract office furniture. So we deal with most of them here. They're on the GSA Schedule 71. Thank you. available for your use. There are small manufacturers that do exist, and they do offer systems furniture. Mainly small manufacturers are available probably in the category of seating, but there are some that do offer systems furniture. And then, okay, so I'm sorry. Manufacturers rely on dealers who act as subcontractors to provide services. So, you know, a manufacturer comes in and they will respond to a quote, but basically they rely on the dealer to respond to the RFQs, to prepare the quotes, and then after award, they provide a level of value-added services. So they'll be responsible for the design of the space. They'll be responsible for the project management. They'll be responsible for the installation phase. So they the manufacturers lean heavily on their dealer network to service the customer's requirement from cradle to grave. And then much of the product is manufactured domestically, mostly out of Michigan. So for any people who have TA concerns, much of the product is manufactured in the United States, so that's not a non-issue. Sorry, technical difficulties. So one of the other things that would be industry communication. So generally speaking, RFIs effectively attract interest, but a lot of times they don't provide detailed feedback about their requirement. So in my experience, we put out an RFI to attract interest, and we do get interest, but a lot of times we go out and we sort of ask further detailed questions about the requirement, you know, if we're missing the mark on something or how to sort of firm up the requirement to make it better or more competitive. And that is the feedback that we look for, but unfortunately, we most of the time do not receive it in response to these RFIs. And in speaking with industry, a lot of times we don't get that feedback because obviously these manufacturers have a lot going on. They're very busy, so sometimes they don't necessarily take that much time in responding to RFIs since they may theoretically never materialize into anything. But one of the things that we sort of have developed here is that when we put out an RFI and we generate the interest, we then follow up and go back to those contractors who are interested and sort of propose a one-on-one conversation, so in an effort to elicit more detailed feedback about the requirement. So a lot of times in a one-on-one scenario, the contractor is more willing to give you detailed feedback about the requirement or about what they can do in terms of the requirement because they're not sharing the playing field with other manufacturers. It's almost like they don't want to give away any trade secrets. So in the market research context, these one-on-one conversations can prove helpful. You can also, at one point in time, we tried a virtual industry day, which also was helpful, and it sort of elicited more feedback than the RFI. But again, if it's a virtual industry day and there are multiple manufacturers in the same arena, they may withhold some of the detailed information that you're looking for. A third way to communicate with industry would be through a showroom visit. So showroom visits provide a glimpse of the vendor's capability and should not set specific expectations. So at a showroom visit, you're going to see, you know, everything that the vendor wants you to see. They're sort of selling a brand or getting a brand name out there, and that's not necessarily in the best interest for government procurement. You know, we aren't out to procure a brand. We're out to get a solution that's going to meet our customers' needs at the best possible price. So a lot of times showroom visits sort of give the wrong impression and don't necessarily give a good indication of what the contractor has to offer in terms of the requirement. Okay, so some of the key documents that we use here as part of our requirements are typicals. So for the typicals, it could be a workstation, it could be a private office, it could be training and conference rooms, it could be collaboration areas. Mainly workstations and private office. Most typicals are workstations or private offices, and they're assigned a code number. such as a WS01 or a PO01, just so that you can sort of identify with, each sort of typical. Sometimes a typical will be a 6x8 workstation, 6x6, it's just whatever your requirement is. We do include our typicals in the statement of work, and they also include electrical and data requirements. So generally, typicals are provided for representation purposes only. We sort of give their use of reference or show a design intent. And we do see that the generation of these typicals takes up a lot of design hours. So they're very involved, and they are a good depiction of what the customer is looking for. For the statement of work is actually your contract. So it's an itemized document that verbally explains all of the characteristics. So not only will the typicals be within the statement of work, but also every characteristic that you're looking for all the components of your requirement will be identified in your statement of work. So it's a very lengthy document, and it does serve as your contract throughout the life. So if there's a question, a contractor has a question about something they're responsible for, if a question comes up during design about a requirement, we sort of always try to make it a point to refer back to our statement of work and treat it as if it's, the do-all, end-all. As far as the statement of work will also encompass any security measures that your specific agency is required to have. It will also speak to the expectation or the requirement as it pertains to project management, design, and installation. So if you want to outline in there what you want the PM for the contractor to be responsible for, what's going to be involved in the design, how many meetings, what kind of deliverables they have to provide to you. And same goes for installation. When they can do the work, if it has to be regular business hours, after hours, how to get rid of the trash so that there's nothing left on site for anybody else to take care of. So all of that will be delineated in your statement of work. Also, you're going to put in your statement of work building particulars, which are very important. The building particulars will identify loading dock information, loading dock size, loading dock access, freight elevator, any kind of parking restriction. It will also identify if you need specific permits to do the work. And the reason why I stress these things and say that these things should be in your statement of work is because it will sort of give the contractor the best possible picture of what your requirement is, and it also helps for pricing purposes. If the contractor knows that they're going to face a difficult installation or they're going to have to do, the installation after hours, they're going to quote accordingly. So the more information you can give them at the forefront, the better your quote will be when it's received. Floor plan is also another document that we provide sometimes. The floor plan obviously it lays out the plan for all the furniture, not just typical. It will identify where private offices will be. It identifies kitchenette areas. It identifies collaboration areas. It identifies everything for the contractor. I will say that as far as the floor plan is concerned, there have been many instances where we actually chose to not provide a floor plan with our requirement. And the reason being is because the floor plan is very detailed and it generally generates a lot of questions by the contractor. There are a lot of things, sometimes quantities that are identified on floor plans don't necessarily match up with quantities in the statement of work, and then that creates a sort of confusion for the contractor and they don't know which document to follow. And sometimes when we get floor plans, they're not always the most accurate or the most up-to-date. We might be on version 10, but the contractor is already on version 11. So sometimes we don't have the most up-to-date or accurate information. So we really try to portray everything in that statement of work and use that as a document for contractors to quote off of versus providing a statement of work and a floor plan. I mean, you can certainly use it. It's just, what I've seen from my experience. The pricing BOM worksheet, we here have sort of provided a pricing template to the contractor community that we've standardized, and we have done so with industry involvement or feedback. And basically, the price form is a summary and also an itemized listing of all of the components that the contractor is quoting. So So, they're quoting a WS1 workstation, which let's just say is a 6x8 workstation. But within the WS1, they're going to give you a line item for every component that makes up that workstation. And they can either delineate this in a bill of materials, or they can delineate it in sort of this pricing worksheet that we have adopted with industry's input. So either way, if you use a pricing template, which we would suggest, or if you obtain a bill of materials from a contractor, you're going to get the same result. It's going to be an itemized listing of every part number that's being quoted for every different product category, workstation, private office that you are asking for. We also put in our pricing template almost like a summary sheet, so we can kind of get a grand total of the project broken down by product category, and that just makes it a little bit more of a summary instead of each individual line item. And then we have also asked for a tab on there for a breakdown of services. So we ask for, design, PM, and installation. And then we ask for, the hourly rate being quoted, and we ask for the number of hours, and we have also asked for the number of people that are needed to get the job done. So we get a full picture of the entire project from using, a particular pricing template or worksheet. So systems furniture is going to be the biggest portion, mostly for your requirement. And systems furniture, we're referencing traditional cubicles or anything that requires a panel, like a panel-based system. Maybe not traditional cubicles, maybe it's a form of, benching or a hybrid or something that involves panel-based systems. So that's what we are talking about when we refer to systems. And it's going to be the majority of the project. We see a lot of agencies who use similar to a traditional cubicle as a private office, because we don't really see a lot of private offices in these open floor plan designs that much. But that's going to drive the spend of the project because it's going to be the largest part. And it's also very much, parts driven. There's a lot of parts that go into, a lot of piece parts that go into systems furniture. It's also going to drive the schedule. It's going to drive the schedule because there are so many piece parts, and like we said earlier, this furniture isn't being stored, so it's being sort of made to order or just in time. So if you can imagine how many piece parts go into a workstation times however many workstations you need, that's what's going to drive your schedule. And it's important to note that the product systems furniture is not standardized and not compatible across manufacturers. Just like we said earlier, you can't use panels from two different manufacturers because it just wouldn't, it's not compatible. They do that for a reason. And it's also not standardized. Like we said, it's sort of made to suit your agency's requirements. Systems furniture can be highly differentiated. There are multiple components within systems furniture line that have a lot of differentiation. One being panel dimensions, so panel height, panel width, like panel thickness, those things are generally differentiated when it comes to systems furniture across manufacturers. Another item that's generally differentiated among manufacturers is overheads. Overheads can be differentiated by the way the door, whether it's a sliding door or a flipper door. It can be differentiated by hardware. It can be differentiated by finish. There are a lot of things that can make overheads, a highly differentiated item, which will create confusion and sort of a problem when you are trying to generate competition. Also, another item that's highly differentiated are stacker panels. They could be glass, they could be acrylic, they could be framed, they could be unframed. There's a lot of different ways that you can use a stacker. And again, this can create a situation if you're trying to generate competition, and it can create a roadblock, something you might run into as being a problem in your competition. So if you have the opportunity to do market research and you can sort of make these items a little bit more broad instead of specific, you might be able to alleviate, some errors when you get your technical quotes back that would cause you to go out with and have a round of discussions or negotiation with your contractors. Case goods, part of the requirement. Again, a lot of times we are seeing, the use of systems furniture to sort of create a private office type of environment. But, the case goods that we're using, you can choose between, even if we're using them in the instance of a cubicle type setting, there is laminate and wood that's available. Obviously, wood is a little bit more complex. There's different types of wood. There's veneer versus solid. So solid wood could be, oak, fir, maple, cherry. And then there's veneer, which is basically like a wood finish over some kind of particle board or something like that, or plywood, if you will. So I don't really know too much about the mechanics of that type of thing, but I do know there's a difference between veneer and solid wood is going to drive the price up. Most agencies are sort of getting away from solid wood, in my experience, in the agencies that I deal with. But I know, if there's a U.S. courts or something like that, they might want traditional solid wood case goods, which are extremely, pricey. And then there's laminate, which obviously is the lower cost solution. But there is a lot of high quality laminate, and it's basically, a finish that's made to look like wood grain. And they come in a lot of different, wood styles, a lot of different colors. They actually have a pretty wide array of alternative solutions when it comes to laminate, and it definitely is the lower cost alternative. So if you have a customer who's willing to be flexible and is okay with laminate versus veneer, you might be able to drive the price down a little bit when it comes to the case goods. So this here is a chart for requirements, do's, and don'ts. So one of the things that, some of the things we've adopted is do specify outside dimensions, example, the footprint. So what we've learned over the years is that if you give a typical and say, it's 40 square feet, don't exceed that, that will be a lot more beneficial to you when it comes to the technical evaluation piece of this. What we don't recommend is specifying dimensions for components within the typical without a variance. So the components that are within the typical, the wardrobe tower, overhead, anything like that, the best course of action would be to spec them with a variance if you're going to spec them with dimensions. We have tried to get away from specific dimensions on those specific components and sort of talk about it in generalities, or say, not to exceed a certain width or something like that, just so that we don't limit competition and create, a problem when we're doing our tech eval where we can see a lot of errors. One of the things also is to address height in terms of seated privacy or standing privacy. Instead of giving specific panel heights, which we wouldn't recommend, we would say, we need seated privacy or standing privacy, and that way you don't put a number on the panel height, which would also generate some issues in the technical evaluation piece of this. We try to rely on commercial specifications. For example, there's a lot of ANSI BIFMA specifications that are related to all different kinds of furniture or product categories that have already been incorporated into the MAF Schedule 71 solicitation. So we don't feel the need to rewrite those or try to come up with detailed engineering specifications. We sort of just identify those ANSI BIFMA standards as it relates to the product categories and leave it at that. The other thing that we try to do is focus on core product areas such as workstations and conference rooms. When you combine too many product categories, you make it very cumbersome to manage, and you make it difficult for one contractor to come in with a solution that speaks to all of your product categories. For instance, items like gym equipment or kitchen equipment, appliances, they seem to create a problem for a lot of manufacturers when they're trying to quote one solution. So if you try to stick to the main areas of concern, the core product areas, that will be much more beneficial when it comes to getting in a quote that's technically acceptable that meets the requirement. We try to address the electrical and data requirements. As mentioned earlier, we try to put those right inside the typicals and also in the statement of work so the contractors are aware. I will say that post-award, the furniture awardee is generally given a copy of the electrical plan so that they can sort of see all the specifics, but you should at least address the type of electrical and data requirements and how many ports and stuff like that that's required as part of your statement of work, because that's usually a pain point for most contractors. And then, as I mentioned in the other slide, as it pertains to the statement of work, definitely want to address building particulars that affect the delivery and installation. You don't want to try to put any surprises on the contractor because they might come back and try to, charge a different price or say they need more money because the installation is a little bit more involved than they were originally provided. And in terms of schedule, I would say you could plan for a 9-month process. I would say in my experience, most of that schedule in the forefront revolves around requirements development and developing typicals. That's generally what takes the longest amount of time. And then once you get that firmed up and you go out with your requirement, typically we try to give the contractor community at least 4 weeks to quote. They definitely would love more time if they're allowed. So if time permits, you can consider giving them more time if you want. We generally stick to 4 weeks, 30 days, but they will always welcome more time. So that also eats up some of your overall schedule. We also say allow for 8 to 12 weeks for manufacturing from completion of field measurements. So I would say that if you have something in your requirements such as demountable walls or high density filing, that is definitely going to take the maximum 12-week lead time. Everything else could be, anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks. I do know a lot of manufacturers sometimes have the ability to rush certain items, not everything. So as an overall rule of thumb, I would say allow for 8 to 12 weeks for manufacturing. And the note about from completion of field measurements is important because the contractors will not put an order into production until they've had the opportunity to go to the site and do field measurements. Basically, because the plans that they're given could change, and also sometimes there are certain things that aren't depicted on the floor plans, they prefer to come to the site and do the actual measurements. There have been a lot of instances where a column wasn't depicted on the floor plan or a window was in the wrong spot on the floor plan, and that's why they prefer to be safe and go to the site and take the measurements, and that way they will order and put the order into manufacturing based off of that. And then you can also account for 2 to 4 weeks for installation, depending on the size of your project. A common topic that comes up a lot is set-asides. There are established small domestic manufacturers. We mentioned that earlier. However, it's important to know that the non-manufacturer rule will generally apply as it pertains to small business set-asides. And basically, the non-manufacturer rule stipulates that a small business dealer or you have to provide the product from a small business manufacturer. So you can't, as a small business dealer, you can't come in with the product of a large business manufacturer. You'll be violating the non-manufacturer rule. So if you're going to do a set-aside, you have to stipulate that the non-manufacturer rule applies. As far as class waivers are concerned, I don't believe there's any waivers for the NAICS that represent the bulk of office furniture spend. So you wouldn't be able to get a class waiver for the office furniture. As far as there is another way, I believe, to get small business credits if that's what your agency is looking for. Under the 71 or schedule, there is a packaged office SIN, and there are a lot of small domestic dealers or small domestic manufacturers can partner with various dealers representing most socioeconomic subcategories. So in the case of the packaged office SIN, you can offer product from a large business manufacturer as a small business. You just won't be able to do a set-aside. So you'll be able to get small business credits, but no set-aside. For the request for quote, so past performance is something that's always evaluated as part of our RFQ process. Most contractors are well represented in the past performance information retrieval system, otherwise known as PIPers. I can say that in our office, for the projects that we manage, any orders that exceed $150,000, we supply a past performance report for in the system, in the CPAR system. So there are many of the manufacturers, especially the large business manufacturers, are well represented in the past performance information retrieval system. So as part of our RFQ process in the past, we used to have the contractors submit a lengthy submission on their past performance, and we would require them to supply sometimes one, sometimes two examples of their past performance, and then we would go back out to those examples and confirm the past performance and confirm the work that was done. And it seemed to add some time to our technical evaluations, and we realized that we don't necessarily need to do that anymore because these contractors are so well represented in the PIPR system, and also they have a rapport with IWAC because we've done numerous projects with many of these large manufacturers and small manufacturers as well. So we updated our language in the RFQ and basically said that we are going to check these resources to confirm your past performance as opposed to you submitting a written submission that is not necessary. So we tried to streamline the past performance evaluation criteria in that fashion, and it seemed to have proven successful. We've used this new language on at least the last 10 or so procurements, and it's been working out really well for us. As part of the request for quote, we asked for a technical volume, and within that technical volume, we asked for 2D and 3D drawings of the typicals that we have outlined in the statement of work. So basically, we asked the contractor to provide us with their drawings showing their quoted workstation, their quoted private office, basically their quoted product in these renderings. We also asked for a bill of materials, which I spoke about earlier, which is the itemized listing of all the products, all the workstations and private office, all the product categories that we require broken down by component. And then we also a lot of times ask for almost a delivery or installation schedule or basically a narrative that indicates that they can meet the installation schedule. Many of our projects have aggressive installation schedules, so a lot of times we go out with part of our evaluation criteria and ask for a matrix or a Gantt chart or something showing how the contractor is going to meet the delivery installation schedule, how they plan on doing that, and if they plan to expedite, and all of that information is provided within this schedule. We also asked for, as part of our request for quote, is a price quote. And within the price quote, like I said earlier, we provide a template worksheet for the contractors to sort of fill in. And we have been working with industry on this to sort of get the worksheet to a spot that's amenable to both the government and the contractors. The one concern that industry has right now is the worksheet is, some of it is manual. So we're still working on fine-tuning that. But basically, we provide a worksheet to them, and it's very similar to what they would provide back to us in the form of bill of materials. What we're asking for on the worksheet is sort of the important information that will help us evaluate the price. So basically, we need the part number, we need the discount they're providing to us, we need the standard GSA discount, and we're looking for where we can find it in their catalog. We assign code numbers to the line items. For example, we talked about this earlier, WS1 for the most prevalent workstation. So that way we can sort of categorize, there's 50 WS1s, 75 WS2s, 50 PO1s, and that helps us sort of summarize, the dollars and where they're being spent and that kind of information. We also request copies of catalogs, and we do this because sometimes the catalogs, if they provided us catalogs in a different format, they're not always up to date, or, we just want to make sure that we have the most up-to-date corresponding information for the pricing so that it will help us do our price evaluation. So we make them give copies of their catalogs where we can find the product. We also request the page references for the part number. So that's something we put in our spreadsheet template. Basically, we can find part number X on page 5 of catalog XYZ. So we sort of look for that information because as part of our price evaluation, we check line by line. We check every single line item, every single part number against their catalog to make sure that the price is correct, and the appropriate discount has been applied for each one. And we also identify in the request for quote the basis of award. Generally speaking, we sort of stick to lowest price technically acceptable, and the reason being is because most of our customers sort of have strict requirements and already come to us with a design that has already been established. So at that point, there really isn't a lot of flexibility. If you have a flexible customer or you have unique requirements that maybe will lend yourself to a trade-off, you could possibly do a trade-off. It's very difficult in furniture, but you could look for, you know, if items have unique functionality or something that's really easily able to be reconfigured, or if a contractor can meet an extremely aggressive schedule more so than the next contractor. Those are some of the things that you can use for a trade-off. But like I said, it would have to be to a flexible customer that doesn't have an already established design that they're looking to get to. As part of the quote evaluation for the technical evaluation, we basically, our team checks each product quoted to ensure it meets the specification laid out in the statement of work. For example, in the statement of work, if we require a task chair that has a 5-star base and adjustable arm, our team looks up the part number quoted for the task chair in the appropriate catalog and verifies that the line item has those features. And we also check to make sure all required components of a workstation were quoted and that the overall footprint was not exceeded. So basically, we are determining the alignment between the government's typicals and the contractor's drawings and supporting bill of materials. This function is extremely time-consuming and it's very tedious, and it's best to be performed by an interior designer or someone who has experience, you know, with designing furniture in the field or has technical knowledge of the product. Just because of the product differentiation combined by the piece part nature of furniture, it's virtually impossible to have no errors in a technical evaluation. There are so many line items, there are so many parts, and there are so many components that go into these one solution statements of work that, you know, there are usually a couple of things that get missed by the contractor. So generally, when you're planning that 9-month schedule, you should leave time to go back out to the contractor community that you're working with for the discussions, negotiations, because that will most likely be a factor into this project schedule. As far as the price evaluation is concerned, generally the competition is very tight when it comes to these procurements. And I would say that it's probably a red flag if you have one contractor out of 5 who comes in that's either really, really high or really, really low. It might be a red flag for you to go back and look at your requirement. In addition to comparing the totals, we make sure, as I said earlier, that the correct part number pricing, the correct part number and the correct price was quoted, and we also pay special attention to the application of the discount. So we make sure it was quoted at the correct price using the correct discount. The one thing to take into consideration is that when we go out with these procurements, we ask for a quantity of 1. We ask for the price to be quoted at a quantity of 1 just because it makes our evaluation much easier. So just know that when you see the total dollars for the quote, it's not going to take into account panel sharing. So basically, you're going to see a bill of materials that reflects, you know, 3 panels or 4 panels. But when they put a cluster together, you know, half of those panels will be removed because there's panel sharing. So generally speaking, you know, a lot of times you can think that the price, your total overall award value will decrease by, I would say, at least 10% to account for panel sharing. You're also going to see design and installation combined that would probably approximate to 20% of the product cost. Again, that's an estimate. If you have, you know, a location that has really strict installation rules and regulations, or if you're in a very high dollar value as it pertains to, you know, union labor areas such as Boston, New York, San Francisco, you know, that number may rise because you're going to pay higher wage rates. Post-award, so the vendor role, basically, if a manufacturer receives the award, post-award activities will transfer to a local dealer. Basically, the manufacturer, there will be a POC or a PM assigned at the manufacturer level who will stay involved with the procurement, but more at a higher level. They will generally be involved in all the correspondence, but they will probably only get involved in the day-to-day if for some reason a problem would arise. The dealer is going to take over all of the functions. They're going to take over the project management. They're going to take over doing the field measurements. They're going to work with the customer to do the fabric and finish selection. They're going to work through the delivery and installation, and they're going to do the punch list. So they'll be providing all of those services for you. As far as the client role is concerned, post-award, basically we look to the client to schedule, these fabric and finish selection meetings in a timely fashion. Once award is made, generally the contractor is very eager to get started, as is the client. So we have a kickoff meeting to facilitate the introduction of the client to the contractor, and then at that point in time, we sort of ask the client to give some dates that they're available to the dealer, and then the dealer will then coordinate meeting usually at the client's facility to sort of go over the entire design and to make the fabric and finish selections. The client will also need to work with the dealer PM to provide facility access policies and instructions. So if you need an escort or if you need to get some kind of clearance to get into the facility, the client is going to provide that to you post-award. Again, grant facility access, same thing. They're going to have to work with the client to get that. And then, as the client, you can certainly accompany the contractor during the creation of the punch list. Generally, the contractor is more than willing to take that upon themselves. They'll walk the space, they'll identify all the issues, because obviously issues happen and things get a little, dented and scratched during installation. So they will create a list for that, and it will be a living document, and they will check things off as they complete it and keep you updated on that. You can certainly be involved in that process as the client from start to finish, or you can, just check in every now and again. And then as the client, since it's your furniture in your facility, we usually generally look to the client to accept the product. As far as billing and closeout is concerned, the vendor is going to generate the final bill of materials based on the product that's delivered and installed. So basically, after you go through the design process and after they after they take the field measurements, they're going to come back and they're going to generate a final bill of materials that will indicate anything that has changed. They're going to, if there was something, they had to move a workstation out of the way, you're going to see all of that in the final bill of materials, and it's also going to account for your panel sharing that we discussed earlier. Generally speaking, the final bill of materials will be received 3 to more, I think this is relating to, the final invoice will be received 3 to 4 months after the final punch list items have been resolved. And then just as we just talked about, the final bill of materials generally never exceeds the quoted price, and that's mainly because of panel sharing. So typically, the final price that you pay is going to be less than the award value.
Okay, terrific. Thank you, Melissa. That was awesome. Before we get into questions, I want you to take a look at your screen and see that there are 2 more furniture webinars scheduled this year. And so this was the first in our series this year. On April 11th, tune back in and we're going to teach you all about the furniture schedules. And then on June 20th, the webinar will cover ordering furniture NSNs through GSA Global Supply. Both of those classes will also earn you 1 CLP. And just keep your eye out for your email. The invitations will be emailed. At the bottom of the screen is our email address, furniture@gsa.gov. If you're ready to start a project or you need advice, definitely email us. And now let's jump into a couple questions. Melissa, you ready?
Yep.
Okay. So we have some questions that were thrown into the Q&A pod. The first one is about Unicor. How does the mandatory source Unicor intersect with GSA?
So I don't think that they are necessarily, I think, not that they're not a mandatory source, but I think you have to address that you went out to them in your acquisition plan. So you don't necessarily have to use them. You can certainly do an evaluation and determine that their product would not meet your needs. But you have to address it in your acquisition plan. Also, the other thing I wanted to mention, I think this was mentioned on the previous webinar, is that you might want to reach out to Unicor directly as it pertains to your specific requirement, because they've had a lot of changes over the past few years that have sort of change the way that they can produce and change the way that they can respond to these requirements. So if it's a really large requirement or something that they can't really handle, they may tell you that at the forefront, and then you can just address that in your acquisition plan that you went out to them and they were not able to fulfill your needs. So you just have to address in your acquisition plan that you considered them, but it's not mandatory to use them.
Okay, and do they have to actually get a waiver?
No, a waiver is not required. You just have to speak to the fact that you considered them in your acquisition plan.
All right, thank you. Is there guidance that you can provide for developing typicals in a person's statement of work?
So I would say that generally, I don't have formal guidance if that's what the question
We
is.
do have samples that
Yeah, we have samples, right?
So if you want samples, you can send in a request via email to furniture@gsa.gov.
Okay. Yeah. So, we have a lot of different samples, and we have a lot of different ways of creating typicals. I think that generally we have gone from putting everything in the typical to sort of less is more. So I would definitely say that we can provide samples to show you how we are setting them up and how we are using them as part of our statement of work.
Do they have to be done by
A design.
a designer, an interior designer?
I would say that, if you don't necessarily, maybe don't have to go to an interior design firm, maybe you could try to reach out to PBS. I do know that they have interior designers, so maybe they can provide some guidance as to,
Okay.
but I would think that someone in the field who can design your space would need to assist you with creating typical.
Okay, great. Okay. Can you give any advice about dealing with damage that happens to your space during installation?
So I think that it's a little bit difficult. There's a lot of trades that are involved in these installations. It's not just the furniture contractor who's is responsible. But as part of our statement of work, we put in there that they have to walk the space with the client before the installation happens, and the contractor documents, takes pictures of any kind of pre-existing condition, if you will. So if there's already a scratch on the wall, if there's already a mark somewhere, then they take a picture of that and they notate it, and they provide the report to the client and says, this is everything that was already damaged. And then when the installation is over, they walk back through the space as part of the punch list and sort of go through, and then any other damage is identified at that point in time. So I think that as part of your statement of work, you have to put in there that they need to walk the space before and after to identify all the damage. Generally speaking, in the instances where we had damage, especially to the furniture product, the contractors really stepped up and took care of it. There are some instances that it's clearly not the furniture contractor's fault. If a guy is putting a light bulb in and steps on a desk or a workstation or a work surface, you can clearly see a footprint or something like that. So sometimes those situations require a little more back and forth between the PM on site and then the contractor PM. I would just say you have to monitor it closely and try to get as much information as you can from all parties.
Okay. Thanks, Melissa. This is kind of an easy question, but somebody asked, are all orders placed with manufacturers or dealers? So maybe there's some confusion about when you do one or the other.
Yeah. No, so not all orders are placed with manufacturers. It just depends on who responds to the RFQ. In many instances, the manufacturer will respond to the RFQ and identify in their quote who the dealer is going to be. But in that instance, the order is still issued to the manufacturer. If the dealer comes in and responds on behalf of themselves, in that instance, the award will just be issued to the dealer.
Okay.
Okay.
So we're going to look at some ones that are just coming in now. How about Mark? Where can we find the pricing BOM worksheet template?
Oh, okay.
Mentioned?
I have a copy. I don't know if you guys have a copy of that. He would email the furniture GSA for a request.
There you go. Okay, so if you send a request for that pricing BOM worksheet to furniture@gsa.gov, we'll be sure to turn that around and get that to you. What is the smallest project that our team here would assist with?
So I would say, that's generally we try to put. I think it was maybe, I don't know if I think they changed it to $1 million at least, but I think at least it used to be 500,000. I think right now it might be anything above 500,000. But there are other factors that go into that. So it also depends on your time frame, like your schedule. If you have a really aggressive schedule and no design, it really doesn't sometimes matter on the dollar value. It's more of a matter of we can't make it happen. We can't do it for you in the time frame that you're looking for it to be done in. So we won't just look at dollar value. We also look at other things such as schedule and where you are in the design process.
Okay, terrific. Let's keep looking through these questions. Bear with us for a second. No. Does FAST have designers to assist with developing the typicals?
So FAST IWAC, we do work with a contractor group that has a design background. I don't know, if the project is coming through IWAC, they will assist the customer or they can assist with developing typicals, but also PBS has interior designers as well that can assist with developing typicals if your project is running through PBS.
And they can award a design contract under Schedule 712K as well
Yes.
to get it done themselves.
There's design firms under 712K, so you can go out under that schedule. There's multiple design firms, so you can get a designer on board through that mechanism, and they can help you with the entire package.
Folks are mentioning, can we send that worksheet to all participants? We certainly can. Yeah. Within 10 days, you're going to get the recording, the slides, and I guess the BOM worksheet. Okay, and and the Q&A sheet. To get a GC project manager assigned to I think that has to do with PBS. Anyway, I feel like we've covered. Anybody on my team here see any questions in this? No. Okay, I think we can wrap this up. Thank you all for participating in this webinar. I hope you found it valuable and informative. And stay tuned for our other webinars we talked about, one on April 11th and June 20th. And thank you all very much, and bye-bye.
Thank you.